Welcome to Wednesday at the Love Tutoring Festival. It is currently 11:03 a.m. and this session will be a pre-recorded workshop by Myatt on mastery learning. I could give Mary an introduction, but she is going to be doing that herself in the recording. So let me just share the recording as we go, and we'll be diving straight into Mary's session. As I said, any questions, just pop them in the chat box.
I'm Mary Myatt, and I'm delighted to be sharing some ideas with you for the Love Tutoring Festival. What a great program you've got, so thank you very much for including me. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts on thinking about mastery, and I'll be allowing time to think and reflect as we go through, and then also some time at the end. So I hope you find it helpful. So as we think about some of the things that can support us to help our pupils and students to master what it is we're teaching them, there are three broad elements that I've selected for this session that we might consider to underpin our work. So the first is making the case that all of us, whether we're adults or children, we do our best work in conditions of high challenge and low threat. Then I'll be taking a look at some of the best bets for our pupils to help them to know more, to understand more, and to be able to do more, and where some of that evidence and research is coming from, just very light touch, that will help us do the best for the young people we're working with. And then finally, a few thoughts on taking our children to a place of mastery. So the first session then, part of this session then, is thinking about high challenge and low threat. One of the questions we might want to ask ourselves is, what is it that we need in order to be able to do our best work? So we're going to start by thinking about unpicking the notions of high challenge and low threat. And we're going to do this through considering the fact that we are a challenge-seeking species. This is the argument that I make, that we like doing things that are difficult. We relish challenge and demanding stuff. So in order to bring this to life, I'm just going to carry out a quick thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this, that in the next few minutes, everyone on this session is going to be set a test. So that means that it's unseen, it's unprepared for, we've got no idea what the test is going to be about. But there we are, we're all just going to do it. It's going to be quite quick. It's going to take about 10 minutes. And then when we've finished, we'll have a break for about 10 minutes. And during that time, through the magic of the internet, in this thought experiment, those tests will be marked. And we're going to join the call, and it's going to be rejoin the call, and we're going to find that we have been ranked according to how well we've done in that unseen, unprepared for test. So when we stop and think about how that makes us feel, you might just want to take a moment to pause and think about whether that is something you relish or something that you might dread. So just take a moment to clock your response. So I've done this thought experiment with tens of thousands of people. What I've found is that about 90% of people are uncomfortable at the thought of this unseen, unprepared for test. We really don't like it for the most part. There's about 10% of people I've found who are absolutely fine with it. They actually relish taking tests and exams, but for the most part, most of us feel very uncomfortable. But the interesting thing is that when we unpack it further, we find through discussion, we find that most people, while they don't like the thought of the test, they're happy to go along with it. But then something happens when we realize we're going to be ranked. that's when the pressure and the discomfort, the psychological discomfort goes up. So what's interesting there is that instead of focusing on the task or the test that we're meant to be doing, our cognitive focus, our attention, very often is shifted to wondering where we're going to be in that rank order. So it means that the consequence of that, we're going to likely to do less well at the test because we're not actually concentrating on the job in hand. So it's quite an interesting development from that we stop actually working as diligently and as focused as we might under those conditions. However, I put it to you that either you or someone you know does things like crossword puzzles or Sudoku or maths puzzles or word puzzles. Now, I'm arguing that these are a form of test. Now, they're not literally a test because we're doing them in our own time, under our own conditions. We can keep them private or we can share the results with others. But nevertheless, I do think they share some of the same characteristics of tests. And specifically, what we're doing here is we're putting ourselves under psychological pressure to do something that is quite difficult. And that we're doing this by way of relaxation, many of us, in our own time. So there's something quite interesting going on here. Not only that, we've got companies making millions of pounds of profit out of the fact that we like testing ourselves, testing in inverted commas. Because if you go into any newsagents, you go into any supermarket, there's yards of this stuff. Now, retailers and supermarkets are not going to give anything shelf space unless it's making money. So what I'm arguing is that in the right conditions, we like doing things that are difficult, as long as there's no danger of anyone making us feel like a Muppet. Now, I've got to be careful because the Muppets do really good work on Sesame Street, but I think we get the gist here that nobody likes to be made to feel stupid. Nobody likes to be made to feel second best. And there was the potential for that in that thought experiment. But what I'm arguing from this is that when we get the conditions right, we do our best work so that it's characterized by high challenge and low threat. It then means that both we as adults and professionals and our children are then able to be in a place where we can debate and discuss the work without anyone wanting to hold back because they're worried about being made to feel stupid, or children worrying about giving incorrect answers. So misconceptions and mistakes are springboards for new learning. So it's really important that we create the conditions that are characterized by high challenge and low threat, both for ourselves as adults, but particularly for the young people that we're working with. And so we're going to see a bit later that they actually relish doing difficult, demanding work. So on the basis of that, you might just want to pause for reflection and just have a think about when you might have felt under inappropriate pressure and what the consequences were for that. And you might then also want to think about what it was like when you felt supported, where it was okay to struggle, either as an adult or as a child. So we'll just pause there for a moment or so while you take some time to reflect.
Okay, so Mary has very kindly given us a couple of moments to pause and reflect. Lucy, I very much agree with what you're saying there in that comment. So we're just going to take around 5 minutes here, and we're going to open this up as a group discussion. So feel free to take yourselves off mute and jump in, or to pop it down in the chat box and we can discuss it there. But just around 5 minutes or so on what Mary was saying there. So she's opened up on this idea of putting people, either students or adults, under inappropriate pressure to perform, to give an answer, to take a test. So I'd just like to invite you to comment, if you'd like, on a time when you felt under inappropriate pressure to perform or to take a test or to do work, and the consequences of that. It's going to inform the discussion as this hour goes on.
I don't mind going. So I would say my A levels, particularly biology. I felt like when I started A levels, I had to take biology because I wanted to do experimental psychology at university. And I was basically told that if I didn't do it, that would close that door. So I sort of felt a bit pigeonholed into taking it first of all. And then the teacher, I just did not gel with, because she is one of those people who would turn up to the lesson, read from a textbook. And when you asked her a question, she'd be like, well, I wasn't planning to cover that this week. So if we could do it next week, and I would be sort of that just didn't work for me. So I actually ended up just homeschooling myself on biology and didn't go to school for the biology lessons. So it made me have quite a negative response to the instruction and the kind of feeling that you had to do something because you were going to get tested. If you didn't do well, it was going to close a door, and I absolutely hated that fact.
Yeah. Okay, great. So yeah, so the idea of the door closing on you, and the kind of the finality of an exam, and how that adds so much pressure to a learner, really. Thank you, Cassandra. Please do feel free to take yourself off mute and comment on that verbally if you wish. If not, that's absolutely fine. Are there any other thoughts then on being under inappropriate pressure in work or study? Charlotte?
This might show the complete banality of some things that go on in schools. So any of you who've been teachers who ever had to do class assemblies, where you were told one thing, but then the expectation was something completely different. So you were told, oh, it should be really, low key. It should just be a couple of kids reading stuff out, and it doesn't have to be this, this, and this. But the reality is, it was a peeing contest, quite frankly, to use the more polite word, in that, although everyone said it wasn't supposed to be like that, what happened is teachers felt like that. So they would create these masterpieces that, would win Tony Awards, if you like, and Olivia's. And yet at the same time, you were told it mustn't take up loads of time in teaching time and in classroom time. So when the hell did people do this, all this, kind of rehearsing? And I used to hate it every time it came round, because I felt I was in this quandary between doing something really meaningful, and I always tried to, but keep it low key, and yet it had to impress this person, this person, and this person. And I just found the whole thing completely stressful. And as much as I tried to make it as child-centered as possible and apply all my good knowledge of teaching, I just found totally under pressure to have to do something miraculous, but without the support.
Which is how I feel many students will feel when they're entering an exam if they haven't been supported that right way, isn't it? They have to do something miraculous without getting that support. That's such a powerful phrase. Thank you, Charlotte. We have time probably for one kind of final idea on this area. This is Mary Myatt she's just getting warmed up here. I assure you, the second half of and the kind of the ending of this workshop is absolutely it's real firecracker stuff. So I'd like more discussion to be in the second and third group discussions. But if anyone's got anything else, then please do pop them in. If not, we'll move on to the next kind of next portion of this workshop. Okay.
Okay then, so the next section is having a think about what some of the findings from cognitive science, what some of those best bets might be in terms of helping us to deploy them as we help support our pupils. So one of the questions we might want to ask ourselves is the extent to which we're being truly ambitious for all our pupils. So when we talk to children, I do a lot of pupil voice and student voice, And it can be summed up in relation to their work, that they enjoy doing difficult, demanding work, regardless of their starting points, regardless of their prior attainment. So I've got a quick example from secondary and then one from primary. I was doing a piece of work about a year or so before lockdown, and I was asked by the school to talk to some students that they'd identified as being high prior attaining, but underachieving, able but idle. And so I sat down and I spoke to these students. There were 6 of them. They were year 9 and they happened to be all boys. And I said, is there any subject in this school where you're not messing around? Because they weren't learning, but they were stopping others from learning as well. And they said, well, we don't mess around in geography. So I said, well, tell me what's going on in geography then. That means you're doing your best work and you're letting others get on with theirs. And they said, well, our teacher just gives us really difficult, interesting stuff to work with, both in the lessons and for homework. So for instance, for homework, she'll give us articles to read from publications, geographical publications. And she says to us for homework, your job is to read this. Now, you're not going to understand it all, but that's all right, because at the start of the next lesson, we're going to talk about what you did understand and what you didn't understand. And they were absolutely lapping it up. They said, we just love doing this work, and sometimes we give work to do that would be in universities, don't you know? They were fizzing with excitement. Now, I was in that teacher's classroom later that day, and she had the same high expectations for all the students. It was a mixed prior attainment class, and regardless of their starting points, she gave them this demanding work and scaffolded the support to help them to get into it. And when I checked the results for geography in that school, they were the highest by a margin. In a very high performing school, similarly nationally. Now that teacher didn't give those pupils demanding work in order to get great results. The great results follow from pupils and students being given difficult, demanding work just above their pay grade, and we support them to get there. So what they were talking about can absolutely be described and characterized by high challenge and low threat. They were given the high challenge, they were supported to get there. So a quick example from primary now. This is from Alison Peacock's work. I know Alison is also, she's going to be giving the keynote for your conference, your festival. So that's fantastic. I really, really rate her work. Doing amazing work at the Chartered College of Teaching. But she wrote a book with colleagues in 2015, Assessment for Learning Without Limits. And as part of that work, they interviewed some children as they were going from year 5 into year 6. And they wanted to find out what those children thought of ability tables and ability groups. But in fact, their responses were to do with the level of work, which is why I'm using it in this context. So the first day the children were back, we asked them what they thought of ability groups. The answers were astounding. The more able loved it. They enjoyed being the bright ones and having special challenges set by the teacher. The middle group were annoyed they didn't get the same work and challenges as the other group. They wanted to try harder work, but they'd worked out they'd never be moved up as there were only 6 seats on the top table. The less able were affected the most. They felt dumb, useless. They thought they'd never be allowed challenges as they usually work with a teaching assistant, and this less able group liked the sound of some of the challenges the top group had, but they knew they would never get the chance. So what I'm taking from this is that children relish doing difficult and demanding work. Now let's not try to make things too easy for our children. Let's support them to get there. So linking this through now to some of the headlines from the research. And we need to think of the research as being like best bets. Is this likely to work in my context with the children that I'm working with? So it's never a 3-line whip. I'm just going to draw very quickly from Peter Brown and his colleagues, Roediger and McDaniel, their book, The Science of Successful Learning and Making It Stick. And they found that in order for learning to be secure, it needs to be effortful. Okay, so if we make things too easy for our children, it means that their learning is not likely to be so deep. Okay, but we've already had the children saying that, and now we've got the some of the research finding that as well. We've got something similar from Dan William in his book, Why Don't Students Like School?, where he says human beings are curious. Really interesting insight. Did we need the research to tell us that human beings are curious? Probably not. However, because a lot of this is sort of intuitive, we kind of know it deep down, don't we? But it's just really helpful if we've got extensive research that actually informs that as well. So one of the things we might ask ourselves is the extent to which what we offer our pupils and students is provoking curiosity. Because when we're curious about something, that creates motivation to want to find out more. So it's a really helpful insight. But then he goes on to say, thinking is hard. Yes, but it's meant to be. Okay, so because if we want our children's learning to be secure, we can't make it too easy. So thinking does involve hard work. But I think there are parallels here with physical work. We can all think of a time when we've been maybe doing some housework or some gardening, or we've gone for a hike or a workout. And when we first get going, it can feel a bit sticky. And then we get into the zone, we find our momentum. And then as we're finishing and after we finish, we feel great. There's that physical buzz going through our systems. And I think there's something similar with intellectual and cognitive effort as well. And just a quick example from my own experience is that I do quite a lot of Sudoku, and I've mastered the easy ones and the moderate ones, and I'm now tackling the difficult ones. Now, every now and then I'll give myself a break and go back and just do one of the easy or moderate ones. Now, what I find is that when I complete those easier ones, I don't get the same sense of satisfaction that I do when I've completed one of the more difficult ones. So there's something interesting going on here, that we get a kind of rush of dopamine, which is the pleasure hormone when we achieve something that we've had to put some effort into that we don't achieve when things are too easy. So what happens then when we offer children some demanding texts? So a quick example from secondary and then one from primary. The first one is from Richard Kennett, who is a brilliant historian and a senior leader across the trust in Bristol. And he's been teaching his pupils in year 7 about the Norman Conquest. And here he set them some homework. And this is what he has to say. He says he tested out the scholarship reading homework with a year 7 guinea pig class. Every student could access it, even those with a reading age below 10. Clearly, we need to have higher expectations of these pupils. So what's Richard given them? Well, he's given them extracts from Mark Morris's account of the Norman Conquest. Now, Mark Morris is a world-renowned historian. And so this is not dumbing down. This is above their pay grade, that the work that they're being given or the materials they're using. What does Richard say about this task? He says, your job for homework is to read these pages and answer all the questions. This is supposed to be hard, high challenge. So don't worry if you can't answer all of them. Low threat. He's combined this high challenge with low threat. He's reassured his class that it's okay if they're not able to do it. What does he find? He finds they all have a go. Right. So a really good example there that basically we shouldn't be dumbing down for our children. Now an example from year 6. This is from Ashley Booth. He says, why do I love whole class reading so much? Because a child who would have long been considered low ability, in inverted commas, can access texts like The Caged Bird. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, along with their peers, and subsequently that great educational term, bang out stuff like this. I'm not going to go into detail on this, excuse me, but what's happening here is the child is making the connection between the conditions for the bird trapped in the cage and the conditions for a large proportion of Black American society in the early 1960s. The book was written in 1960. Very poignant, and sadly still as live an issue today as it was then. Now, the point is that child would not have been able to give those responses if they had not been offered that rich material. So when we offer children material above their pay grade and support them to get there, then we're going to be supporting them deepen their learning. So just a moment or so to reflect on that.
Okay, great. So we're going to take another 5 minutes here just to open up a discussion about what Mary has just been discussing there, which is this idea of offering children work and learning opportunities above their pay grade, above the level at which you think they should be working. Do you, as tutors, do that?
I've definitely noticed that when I give the children that I'm tutoring, sort of, or say to them, say if they're in year 4, and I can see that they're doing particularly well on a certain part of fractions, and I think I can actually push them to do the year 5 or 6 part of it. I give them the opportunity, and they absolutely they thrive on it, and they love that. And then they go and tell all their friends and their parents, and they're like, oh, guess what I did today? I did my year 6. And it just, for their self-esteem, I think that really helps.
Yeah, and they can go and tell their friends and their parents, can't they? Mum, Dad, I did this today. I did a year 6 problem today, and I absolutely smashed it.
I like to leave them with aha moments. So if we're doing symmetry, I like to end with the question, how many lines of symmetry is there on a circle? And I like to show young kids, if they do a recurring decimal, and I don't tell them it's going to happen, and when they watch it happening when they're doing the division, and you see their faces light up, and then for them to have to say the word infinity, those moments, and you could do that with any kid of any age. They don't have to be, but those moments are really cool.
Yeah, and something that Mary Myatt has talked about in the past is that over the course of a session, you can start with work that is not above their pay grade, and that over the course of a single session, you can work towards giving them something, 3/4 of the way through the session, that peak moment in the session, at which you say to them, wow, do you know that you just did a question for someone 3 years above you? Or did you know that you just did a GCSE question at 11 plus? So building in that sense that they are taking control of their learning and that they are progressing kind of in front of you. Thank you very much, Tripti. Wow moments, exactly as Julia says. Very good. Well, we've got a little bit more time here, so please do just drop in. Any thoughts on testing children either consciously or subconsciously, either telling them that that's what you're doing or not telling them that's what you're doing, and then letting them work that out?
Yeah, I think it, like, on the whole thing about the challenge, I really disagree with children thinking about, oh, I'm in year 4, so I have to do this, or I'm in year 5, so I have to do this. So one thing that I really, obviously, if you're preparing someone for an 11 plus exam, or if you're helping someone with a particular GCSE, you are a little bit bound to the curriculum constraints, but that's only in your head. And I think quite a lot of time as an educator, because we've come through the same system, we're also like, we're making so many assumptions based on what we know about the child. So for example, someone who's like, oh, I'm working with a dyslexic learner, so I'm going to have to, find easier text. And that's just like ridiculous. So I just think if they're taught that you as a teacher are having to, almost like dumb things down because they have a label that someone has decided to give them, I just think it's so negative for the child, and it really does pigeonhole them into thinking, oh, I'm in an English lesson, I can only learn English, or oh, and so that's where I come from the like home ed side of things, because we just go around the world and we just like learn things, you know. So I've had like 6-year-olds who are doing, you know, really quite critically, you know, like analyzing debates about, you know, we went to Germany and we learned all about the wall and when it was taken down, and they were like, isn't this absolutely like barbaric, Lucy, that this happened? And then I was like, and they're like, why have I never learned about this in my school? And I'm like, well, it's probably on about like the year 9 kind of curriculum. And they're like, who chooses that I should learn that in year 9? And I just think that's so interesting. So, and I think that's what we should be promoting as tutors, that aren't governed by a curriculum that we have to help with, you know. Sorry, I went on for too long.
Sorry, can I just say, Johnny, just a sec, you know, what a way to constrain a child's learning by telling them, no, that's next year. No, don't learn that yet.
It literally fills me with like such like, I just can't even. If I ever heard one of my tutors saying that to someone, I'd literally be like, sorry, this is not going to work. It's just not the one. Yeah,
Jolyon, please.
Yeah, in science, this is one of my ongoing frustrations, as Ludo will know very well, that the way science is taught is a lot of what you learn early on is then unlearned later on, because it's only accurate over a very narrow range of circumstances. And what I try and do when I'm teaching science is help them answer, yes, the GCSE question, but I want them to go on and do science later on, because I love science myself. It's been a wonderful life for me. And I want them to be able to experience that as well. So I try and open the door to things that are further down the line. What happens at A level? What happens at degree level? What are they going to learn? And also try and bring that back to the real world they live in. Because GCSE science, you know, nowadays doesn't really explain the world we live in very well. It's too basic, it's too simple, and they've got to be able to have an idea that there's an awful lot more out there beyond them, and that they're learning this because that's what the exam demands, but there's more out there that they will come to later on. And if I can just, you know, shed a little bit of light on that and show how exciting it is and how much fun it's going to be in the future, that's what I try and do as a tutor anyway.
Very good. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Can I just pitch in there? Because I love the idea of sort of inspiring them with how the subject can build a life for you. So it's so much more than an idea now or a little bit of a stretch of an idea. It's actually thrusting right forward into their horizons and saying, no, this subject goes and goes. And I think that that's something that, you know, we've been talking about limiting them with year 3 or year 6. But actually what we want to do is show them that each of these subjects, well, you know, in the same way that learning by age is synthetic, learning by subject is also synthetic. And really, if we're talking about lifelong learning, which is where we have to get to talking, then we have to show them how the subjects, oh, I've lost it, sorry.
Interact and interrelate.
Yeah. Interrelate, but also build it, that you're building, you know, the way Jolyon said, science gave me a good life, which sort of sounded like something from a musical, really made me feel that we're standing on our subjects. I'm an English person, you can tell. You know what I mean? We stand on our subject. So it's much more than, I don't know, it's much more than this year or next year.
Yeah. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're going to have to bring this discussion here to a close, because we have to move on. There's still around 25 minutes left of Mary's presentation. So let's move straight on. It only gets better from here.
And then to turn to another helpful insight and finding from the cognitive science, again from Dan William, whose work, along with others, has found that our brain's privilege story. So this is incredibly helpful when we're thinking about deepening children's learning, so they know more, they remember more, they're able to do more. That the stories are incredibly powerful. And when Dan is talking about stories, he's talking about not just novels and fairy stories, poetry, visual stories, art, picture books, etc., all have the power to support learning. We also have this from Steven Pinker, world-renowned scientist, who says cognitive psychology has shown that the mind best understands facts when they're woven into a conceptual fabric, such as a narrative, a mental map, or intuitive theory. Disconnected facts in the mind are like unlinked pages on the web. They might as well not exist. Okay, so incredibly helpful insights here from the field of cognitive science when we're in the business of helping our children to know more and remember more. And there's work to do, colleagues, because in England, there is a reading deficit. There's 3 headlines relating to this. In the last year for which there was any data, 2019, over a quarter of children did not reach the expected standard. With the loss of learning because of lockdown, that's likely to have increased. Some research from the Department for Education in 2017 found that only about a third of children are being read to at home on a daily basis. I doubt those figures have changed much in the intervening time. And then some research from Teacher Tap in 2018 found that only about 15% of Year 4 teachers are reading to their class every day. Now, this isn't to have a go at Year 4 teachers, but I think it's indicative of the fact that we've got work to do. And so one of the questions I ask is, why are we not reading more to our pupils and our students? There are some barriers to this. So one of them is that it's enjoyable. So why is this a barrier? Well, we're inclined to think that if something is enjoyable, it can't be work. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of reading aloud to someone else or to a class, and something happens to the atmosphere. It's what Claire Seeley, who was a head in Hackney and who is now senior leader in charge of school improvement in Guernsey, it's what she calls the collective cuddle. We all sort of recognize that. So we've got to override that and say, because it's pleasurable does not mean it's not work when we've got this considerable evidence sitting behind it. Then there's the issue of time. Colleagues saying, I simply haven't got time to include this, right? But I'm arguing that we need to make time. And then the third barrier, in my view, is evidence. That as a sector, we are very, very keen to have written evidence to prove that learning has happened. So written evidence is really important, but children, in order to write well, need to be fed properly first. They need to be fed intellectually first through speaking, listening, and reading. And if you look at the national curriculum for English, there are 4 elements: speaking, listening, and reading, before we get to writing. Okay, so just because a child has written something in their books, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've learnt it if they've not been properly fed beforehand. So what I'm arguing here is that we create the space to do this richer, deeper work. A nice piece of research that came out of Sussex University a few years ago, the faster reading research, what they found was that simply reading challenging, complex novels aloud and at a fast pace in each lesson repositioned poorer readers as good readers, giving them a more engaged, uninterrupted reading experience over a sustained period. So just the headlines of what that research is about. Those schools that took part selected 2 novels for this project that were at least a year above what they'd normally be taught. This was all they did for 12 weeks, radical English lessons, reading aloud. But there were no written expectations. They could make notes in the backs of their book, but there was no expectation for anything written. It wasn't a huge trial. There were 365 year 8s involved. What they found at the end of the trial was that overall, the reading ages had improved by 8.5 months for that group. What did they find for the poorer readers, the children who've been identified as poorer readers? Well, it almost doubled. It almost doubled. So So what are the implications for this if we're either tutoring small groups, or we're in primary or in secondary, but we're not teaching English? I think the fundamental thing is we just need to be reading more to our children, with them and to them, in whatever subject, right? Adapting these findings so that our children know more and remember more through the power of a high quality text. When they talked to the pupils about why they thought they'd done so well in this research, they found that they said, we don't normally get the chance to do this interesting stuff. That links back to us being a challenge-seeking species, okay? So while phonics, decoding, SPAG and level readers are really important for our children who might be struggling, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. I'm arguing from this research, they do need more. And that's because our oral comprehension is more developed and more advanced than our reading comprehension, particularly if we're struggling. We can understand more through hearing than we do necessarily from the written page. But that means that information and new ideas can still go in, even if they're not at that decoding level yet. Now, there's one school, a number of schools are taking this really seriously. One school I was talking to recently, they read a minimum of 800 words every single lesson. Doesn't matter the subject, because they understand the power of vocabulary. So why are stories so important then? They create the big picture. A well-chosen story will create the big picture, the background for our children. We know that the hinterland or background means that they're likely to understand more about what it is we're teaching them. Well-written texts contain complex ideas, concepts, really, really helpful for children knowing more and remembering more over time if they understand concepts. A well-written text will enrich children's vocabulary because the spoken word is less sophisticated than the written word. You're going to find more sophisticated vocabulary, language of greater lexical depth and complexity in a well-chosen text than you're going to get in everyday talk. So it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And as we've just seen, they are inclusive for all our children, regardless of their starting points. And a reminder that they are asking for more demanding work. So this is bringing it back to the children the whole time. They're asking for more demanding work. So again, I'm just going to pause for a moment and just ask you to reflect on your observations of what I have just shared with you.
Now, there are 17 minutes left of Mary Myatt's recording, and there are 14 minutes left until 12 p.m. So I do apologize, but we're going to continue with Mary Myatt's recording here because I don't want to delay the schedule too much. But if you, as ever, if you have ideas about giving students more demanding work, then please do pop them down in the chat. And I'm sure one of the very many people on the chat will respond to it and engage with it and perhaps follow up with it afterwards.
Sorry. Two things. Firstly, I feel a readathon coming on. Maybe we should get all of our students involved in a great big readathon, which is my favorite thing in the world to organize. And the second thing is, before Dame Alison Peacock comes in, I'm going to make a 30-second activity break. And I'm going to get you all to jump up and shake about a bit, because some of us have been sitting here since 9 o'clock this morning. Go ahead, Ludo, sorry.
Okay then, so let's take a look at some of the ways we can use books, high quality texts. First one I've chosen, just as an example, is Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species by Sabina Radeva. And this would be suitable if I was teaching Year 6, the program of study for science in the national curriculum. It talks about children being taught about evolution. So, because I want to underpin it with a high quality text, I've selected Sabina Radeva's work. She was a scientist, trained as a scientist, and then retrained as an artist. So I've got confidence that this is going to be accurate. It's also going to be beautifully illustrated. I also think it's going to provoke my children's curiosity through these wonderful images and through the big ideas here. And if we look carefully, we've got some of this rich, lovely vocabulary, geological records, sediment, extinct species. We're pulling that vocabulary out, possibly putting it on a knowledge organizer and supporting our children to know more and to remember more over time. Misconceptions, she's pulled out, really helpful. Misconceptions are springboards for new learning. They provoke curiosity, and quite often they can be counterintuitive. So as we unpick those, we find that our learning goes deeper. An example from history, Key Stage 1, and I'm indebted to Andrew Percival, who's a deputy head in Oldham, doing great work on the curriculum. The unit for the Great Fire of London, they've selected this lovely anniversary edition. Again, these wonderful images and this very rich text that they've selected. They could have chosen a leveled reader. There are leveled readers about, but they've taken something that is above the children's pay grade. Why? Because they want to stretch them. They want to develop their vocabulary. So children are going to be drawn into this. It's going to provoke their curiosity. And again, pulling out the key words that they want to emphasize and make sure their children are fluent in by the end of the unit. And in many cases, the best way to do that is through a well-constructed knowledge organizer, making sure our children know more and remember more over time. Just a few more examples. Lovely work from Bill Bryson, art history, Martin Gayford and David Hockney's work, absolutely irresistible. Gombrick's Little History of the World. So I've used this for year 8s, although it was written as a primer for undergraduates going up to university over 60 years or so ago. A well-written text can work across a number of age groups. And so doing a unit on ancient Rome, I just pulled out some of that as additional reading that I was going to expose for those children. But talking with someone recently, they said they'd use the same book in year 5, right? So very ambitious, but if it's unpacked appropriately, then children relish, having this grown-up stuff offered to them. Quite often people say there are no stories in mathematics. Okay, there are masses of stories in maths, and make some wonderful homework or little research projects. Just one example, Alex Bellis's work. NCTM has got some great stories. And then just more generally, how many of our children know where 0 comes from or where algebra comes from? Just building some background knowledge is really helpful for our students. Wonderful for RE. Feynman's 6 Easy Pieces of Physics. High quality written work is accessible, even if it's been written by world-renowned professors like Feynman or indeed Ravelli. Okay, 7 brief lessons on physics. That would work for Key Stage 3. I think could possibly be trialed with year 6. Don't need to understand every word. It's just taking children into the domain. It's going to spark their curiosity, and it's going to give them access to this rich language. An example for geography, Michael Palin's work, background to an Inspector Calls, Ian Baruma's Ground Zero, what it was like in 1945, and what those conditions, how they would have fed into Priestley's work on an Inspector Calls. Amanda McWash's book, But Where Are You Really From? Great for citizenship, PSHE, probably get some geography from there. Just a fascinating book for itself. Key Stage 3, Upper Key Stage 2. Amanda's the CEO of Christian Aid, and she's answering this question, which is asked of many people, adults and children who have a BAME background, but where are you really from? Okay, so she does that very elegantly. And then we can do this all the way through whatever age group. So I prepared books and high quality texts for a geography unit going from early years, where I've taken lovely poem from Shirley Hughes's Out and About, then used at Key Stage 1, The Street Beneath My Feet, beautifully written by Charlotte Willem and illustrated by Yuval Sommer. This kind of text is going to take children into some really, really interesting intellectual spaces and places, and that is going to deepen their learning over time. Then Key Stage 2, The Pebble in My Pocket, taking this thread through. So, and that's available on the Myatt & Co, the extended piece of work on there. So the question we need to be asking ourselves is, do our children deserve the best, and what might that look like? So, thinking now about some resources for mastery. And so, 3 things we might want to think about. Whatever we offer our children, does it privilege thinking over task completion? Right. So what makes me think about this is that I was talking to a child who in year 4, and we'd been before lockdown, and we've been talking about her work in English. We were looking at her literacy book, some lovely work in there. But I'd noticed that a couple of lessons before, she'd been learning about homophones. So I assumed she'd learned it because she had completed a worksheet which had been downloaded from the internet, been ticked off, smiley face by the teacher, stuck into her book, and no doubt sitting on some spreadsheet having turned it green for that key performance indicator. So I assumed the child had learned it. So I said to her, oh, homophones, those are interesting. What have you learned about homophones? And the child was not able to say. Bright little thing. It was because the completion of the task was more important than whether she'd actually learnt it, right? So whatever we're offering our children, to make sure that privileges thinking over task completion, whatever age they are, and we can very quickly shift this by saying, instead of have you finished, saying, tell me what you've learned, shifts that really quickly. The second is that it really ought to lead to mastery. Whatever we're offering our children should lead to mastery over time. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that a child can do something on their own terms in a new context as a result of what they've been taught. So that's what we're thinking about there. Can a child do something on their own terms in a new context as a result of what they've been taught? And then finally, I think that our children deserve the best, and therefore that the materials we give them should be beautiful. I don't mean covered in sparkly butterflies. I mean, are they really good for their learning? So with those in mind, what do we think about this example where children have been learning about the interiors of places of worship? This is Key Stage 2, and in this lesson, they're learning about what the inside of a mosque is like. So I don't think that image is good enough for my children. And then they've just got to fill in the blanks. All right. It turns out that there were some mistakes which then later had to be corrected. So someone has written in who's indicated what the mistakes were. And to be fair, they were changed. But the problem is that it's not really stretching children at all, even after they've been corrected. Then they're going to design a mosque, which again is neither art nor RE. It's not putting any appropriate cognitive load onto them. And then they're going to design their own prayer mat, also problematic. However, if we want our children to go in deeper, they need to be shown authentic sources and resources. So if we knew that there was a website called the Museum Without Frontiers, which is a collection of art and artifacts from museums around the world and art galleries around the world. This is what children deserve. Okay, but we need to know that it's there so that we can offer them this richness, this depth, rather than shallow worksheets. What about the Khan Academy? Why aren't we showing them a real mosque, for instance? Why are we showing them degraded pictures? If we're thinking about history, these lovely rich images available from the British Museum, teaching history with 100 objects. So if we happen to be teaching about Greek myths, either in history or maybe in English, and we're teaching the myth of Demeter and Persephone, why wouldn't we show our children the art and the artifacts from the ancient world? Okay, this is what they deserve if we want to take them to a place of mastery. These are available free, they don't cost anything. We know they're going to be accurate and high quality because they have been produced by the academics working in the field alongside teachers. So we know that they're going to be high value. So what I'm arguing from this, if we want our children knowing more and remembering more and being able to do more, then we need to be going to the authentic sources, all right, rather than degraded worksheets. So for each of the national curriculum subjects, I prepared half a dozen websites that don't cost anything to access, but they contain these rich materials. So again, just pause for a moment so that you can reflect on what that means to you and whether you agree with the argument I'm making.
I think we agree with the argument that Mary is making. I'm just going to show and then share the screen for the final few moments of Mary Myatt's workshop. I would love to have a group discussion here again about those areas, because Mary has given us so many texts there that we can look out to. And also I feel that point that she's ending on there about worksheets is a really practical point that tutors can pick up on, that that's classic standard worksheet that you get is actually denying the student you're working with the chance to see the bigger picture. So that's a really good one to think about there. So I think there are 4 minutes left of this recording, and then we will move on to our next event, which is a keynote by Dame Alison Peacock, who has joined us in this event room and will be speaking as soon as Mary Myatt is finished.
Some of the other things that we might do. Well, we might offer our children some low stakes quizzes. Right? There's a lot of evidence that if the stakes are low, children are likely to learn more. Dylan William has done a great deal on this. This is about children having a few things to be tested on. They mark them themselves and the results being private to them. All right, that is going to deepen their learning. So how we know if they've got it through quick chat with them, all right, but it doesn't need to be captured. The minute we start capturing this sort of thing, this is quizzing and testing for learning rather than for accountability. Then it's a really, really useful tool. Similarly, retrieval practice. And this is where things like knowledge organizers can be really useful. If there are certain things we think our children really ought to know and understand, then making sure we revisit those and we've captured them on a knowledge organizer, that can be really helpful. Okay, supporting them in extended writing. As we write, collating our ideas, this deepens our learning as well. So extended writing with appropriate support is going to take our children to a place of mastery. And then we might also ask, well, how will we know whether they have really mastered something? So one of the things we might want to think about is the audience, or who they might be preparing work for. So some of it will just be quick work in the backs of their books, or just practice exercises, but then they need opportunities to produce work that they have thought about, made their own. And one of the things that we might consider, both in primary and in Key Stage 3, are double page spreads. So this is the work of Paul Watson from the North Ormsby Academy. And what we find when children are provided with opportunities for drawing their learning together for an audience, as in this double page spread, their learning has to go deeper. They have to make sense of what they've been taught to bring it together in this way. So what we've got from Paul is the double page spreads, where he discusses this for about half an hour. It's available, free access on Myatt & Co, the online platform. And he also talks about how he underpins this work with high quality texts as well. So, colleagues, we've talked about how it's important to have our work, both for ourselves as adults and the young people we're working with, underpinned by the notion of high challenge and low threat. We've had a look at some of the best bets, just the headlines of those to support our children knowing more and remembering more. And then we've considered some of the things that lead to mastery. So let's remember, colleagues, as we go about our work, that we're human beings first, we're professionals second. We hold ourselves to account, but in the way that is both robust and kind. So we're human beings first, we're professionals second, and to remember that the young people we're working with, they're human beings first and they're learners second. So colleagues, I hope you find that helpful. I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions of this very rich program that you've been offered, and do take time to reflect and to think about what this and the other sessions mean for your practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, wherever you are right now at midday on Wednesday, the 30th of June, for delivering that and for making it seem that you were here with us and guiding us along in that discussion. So I hope that you all were able to take something from that. We will be moving right on to our next event. So we're just going to take 1 minute if you guys would like to. I believe Julia has something for us.